Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Kurt Creager.
Thank you very much. I have 1 p.m. with the mayor, so I'm going to speak first, even though I think some of the metadata that you're going to hear from the other speakers is actually probably more universal. I have obviously a narrower focus. I'll stay around until about 1:15, and then I have to run. It's my pleasure to be here today. Having worked both in the public and private sector, I admire the hard work that you all do, and it does intersect in large part with the policy framework and activities of the Housing Bureau. I wanted to give you an idea of what's going on within the city. As you may know, last week the City Council extended the state of housing emergency for 18 months. That provides a great deal of focus of all the bureaus, but especially housing, obviously, on supply. And this is a series of milestones. On the left is a graphic which is on our website, and it's actually a live graphic, so you can click on each button and you can see what each project is. But under Commissioner Dan Salzman, we increased our throughput by 50% within a year. And those projects are all now moving through the system. The right graphic is the current inventory. We have about 14,000 units in management, those owned by nonprofits as well as for-profits with long-term regulatory agreements or use restrictions. In the middle, you can see a series of milestones, which are closings that have undergone this year. The Ellington closing, which you may have watched, was a $47 million closing in February. We put that property under contract with a 15-day physical due diligence period and no financing contingency. We were very serious about preserving that property and mobilized very quickly to do so. That was the first acquisition with the Portland Housing Bond revenue and was actually acquired before the first bonds had been sold. Second, 14th and Raleigh, which is a high-rise property purchased from Hoyt Street Properties as part of a development and disposition agreement, will serve very low-income families. It's being developed by Innovative Housing. The 3000 Southeast Powell, the so-called Safari Club, closed last week. It now has a fence around it, and we'll bring that forward for development with about 200 units in the very near future. Next week, Lentz Center, if you've not been to Lentz lately, there's over $100 million worth of construction in the Lentz Center area, and Palindrome Communities, Chad Reinecker and Rob Gibson have done a magnificent job of transforming what used to be the New Copper Penny and an Exxon gas station into a very impressive placemaking project. So they'll have a topping out party next week. The City Council tomorrow will hear the framework plan as it regards the use of Portland Housing Bond revenue, and we will open the transaction window for new projects on Monday the 23rd. Then we have two big closings at the end of the year. Block 45, which is a flagship site, half block owned by the Housing Bureau on Grand at Holiday, about 2 blocks from the Convention Center Hotel, will be conveyed to Home Forward for a high-rise. And last but not least is River Place Parcel 3, which was actually procured before I started with the city. It's 2 towers on a shared parking podium right where the Portland streetcar turns into the North Mac South Waterfront area right around that transformer that you've probably been noticing for years. That will be a significant project, over 340 units, both a market rate tower and an affordable tower, undertaken by Bridge of San Francisco with Williams & Dame as their partner. So in short, Portland has about 125,000 renter households, and only about 20 to 25,000 of those are touched by the city through either Home Forward or through the Housing Bureau. So I think it's safe to say that we only affect about 20% of the market. You all in the private sector affect the balance of the market. So the symbiosis between us is quite important. Private landlords are necessary for this city to work, and a robust, open rental market is essential to our shared success. But we've seen a lot of stresses in the private rented sector. At the end of 2016, average rents were running about $1,800 a month, less utilities across all platforms. With utilities, you're up around $2,000. And yet, 30% of renter households earn less than $20,000 per year, and that's roughly the earnings of a full-time worker. If we talk about workforce housing, you can still be fully employed and still be extremely low income. This is a graphic, and you have it on your table, so I won't belabor it, but it looks at the spectrum of housing, who can afford what. And as you can see, the 31% of the housing, the rental units are affordable to people of less than 60% of AMI. So most of our effort is in that segment of the marketplace. That amber color on the far left, people over 120% or 200%, 120% of AMI or 100% of AMI. Theoretically, 22% of the market is affordable to that group, but obviously, in an unregulated market, people can be overhoused and can choose to compete for available affordable units. So when people talk about market affordable housing in this market, that's very much a temporary condition. Things aren't affordable for very long as prices get bid up. So I use this slide partly because I want to make sure that you know why public policy is structured to benefit people under 60% of AMI. It's because that group is basically increasingly locked out of the marketplace. I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about minimum wages because I think we're going to start to see, and I'm sure the state economist has some views on this, we're going to start to see some tectonic plates moving in the rented sector as the minimum wage goes up. We've modeled what that looks like in terms of people's ability to pay. As you know, from the 2016 special session, Senator Alan Dembrow prime-sponsored what was ultimately Senate Bill 1532, increased across the state minimum wages, in Portland the greatest, in a graduated scale. And by 2022, the full-time minimum wage earner will be earning about $2,557 a month before taxes. So we looked at what that means and did some modeling around it. And this is Portland Housing Bureau data. It hasn't been peer-reviewed or tested by anybody else. But the percentage of monthly earnings to meet the average rent for a full-time minimum wage worker in 2015, before Senate bill passed, people were edging about 78% of their gross income was being spent on rent. So when you talk about renters under stress, and I'm sure some of your people and some of your companies may have similar stressors, they can't compete in this marketplace very easily without being pushed to the very edges of the metro area. So we looked at what would happen if the minimum wage went into effect in 2022 as scheduled, and we only saw 6% annual growth in rent, which was the 10-year rolling average of the last 10 years. And you can see that the cost curve bends significantly, that this is a good deal for renters because they have more disposable income. And now the national standard of affordability is 30% of your income should be spent on rent and utilities. In this case, people's cost curve is better, but they're still spending over 60%. But it's an improvement. If we use the 5-year rolling average, which is 8%, it's basically a hairpin and it course corrects. And if we use the 2-year average, which is what if we have a new normal in this marketplace, I think that's debatable, essentially you see that there is a course correction and essentially a reversion to prior trends. About 85% of people's gross income is spent on rent and utilities. I put that out there because in the legislature there's a lot of debate about renter protections, and this slide for me elucidates that issue is not going to go away for the next several years, because if we are in a new normal and we do see the rent burden continue to increase, then there will be continuing calls for state policy interventions. Who are these people? I don't want to belabor this, but as I said earlier, you can be low income and be gainfully employed full-time in the service economy. People at 100% of AMI, singles, would be about 42,000. At a household of 4, would be about 60,000. We sometimes forget that this is an essential part of our economy, the backbone of our economy, and that's why Mayor Ted Wheeler cares about the group. That's why he's made housing a priority. I wanted to give you a few sort of contours of what has happened in the last 2 years. You probably have seen 1 or 2 of these. You may not have looked at them in sum total. In October of 2015 was the first state of housing emergency that was enacted. I came in August of 2015. And that immediately allowed zoning to be adjusted so that especially emergency shelters that were required to be separated from one another could be more closely located within neighborhoods. That resulted in some blowback in certain neighborhoods, notwithstanding Old Town Chinatown and other parts of the city. The Housing Bureau received first call on any surplus city land, and we have begun to close on some of those sites. At 60th and Stark is a good example. This is a Wise Care child care facility in a brick schoolhouse. It's an unreinforced masonry building. The Housing Bureau purchased that from the Parks Bureau. It was surplus to their needs. We have other projects underway with the Water Bureau. So we'll look at those as they come and make decisions as to their future and ultimate use. In the case of the Wise Care, we would like to see the Y embedded in the future program with about 40 or 50 affordable housing units on Mount Tabor with a community facility serving local kids. There was a 50% increase in the amount of tax increment financing that goes into housing. Prior to 2015, 30% of TIF went to housing. Now 45% goes into housing. That means over the life of the URAs, about $270 million is moved from Prosper Portland's budget to the Housing Bureau budget. And in mixed-use buildings, we actually underwrite projects together. So we're closely aligned with Prosper in many different ways. Mandatory inclusionary zoning went into effect, as you probably know, February 1st. We slow-walked that. It took us about 9 months. We had a panel of experts, very talented people, assist Commissioner Saltzman in calibrating the incentives and the offsets. When I worked for OTAC, I was responsible for business development, and I've often said that I did more for business development for architecture and engineering in the city of Portland than any other single person, because all the A&E firms had about 6 months worth. They had 4 years worth of work compressed into a 6-month period of time. So we now have about 5 years supply of vested multifamily projects. That's great. If they can go forward, we can use those units. We are now starting to see projects come forward, including projects that have previously vested who have gone to the voluntary approach because they like the offsets and are willing to work with us. We'll see more of those as we go forward. The market will adjust. The construction excise tax went into full force in effect August 1st of 2016. So all those projects essentially will help capitalize the offsets. That's the purpose of the construction excise tax, is to provide fee waivers and to pay for all the exemptions for the projects that are in the IZ pipeline. And I might add that the Housing Bureau has people stationed at BDS to do the early assistance, so our staff are embedded within the Bureau of Development Services. We have improved the throughput of projects by aligning BDS, PBOT, Planning and Sustainability with the Housing Bureau. So we co-apply now. The Housing Bureau is listed on the face of every affordable housing project for which we fund, and those projects are processed first. This Office of Renter-Owner Services has been created by the council through the budget, and last week they appointed a rental services commission, which is, I think, pretty well balanced between landlords and tenants. And we will, by the first week of December, have put forward to council the final corrections necessary for mandatory relocation assistance, which, as you probably know, is in litigation. So we've responded to the renter state of emergency with several policy moves. Those are initial moves. It really depends on what the legislature does next. And as you witnessed from the business press, the Daily Journal of Commerce, and the Portland Business Journal, Commissioner Udaley has a quiver of arrows of additional things that she'd like to see. Voters did approve, and for those of you who voted here in Portland, thank you for the housing bond. We call it the Portland Housing Bond. It's $258.4 million. Tomorrow, the City Council will take up the framework plan. As I said at the outset, the transaction window for those projects will open Monday, the 23rd of October. So we will essentially be open for business to place about $200 million worth of equity through that process. As I mentioned, Commissioner Saltzman really directed me to move the needle, and I was happy to do so. So the projects that are coming to fruition now are essentially largely originated under Dan. He'll be missed a great deal because he was a really steady supporter of housing production, as well as public and private partnerships. We have teamed with Prosper Portland on the acquisition of the U.S. Postal Service parcel, also known generically as the Broadway corridor. The Housing Bureau is actually an equity investor, so we own 20% of that project by having already placed $15 million of equity. It was financed by the City Council, you might recall, with an $88 million line of credit. So jointly, the Housing Bureau and Prosper will seek a master developer this winter, and as reported, it will be part of the Amazon HQ2 bid ahead of time. just because it makes perfect sense. City Council last week did increase the heights of that site to between 250 and 400 feet. So it currently has all the zoning entitlements necessary, unlike other projects elsewhere that might not have the zoning entitlements. We have harnessed the short-term rental revenue through Airbnb, VRBO, and Home Away, and we've securitized that revenue with the short-term rental revenue-supported bond. That's how I'm able to afford the Safari Club, for example. We're purchasing that with short-term rental revenue to try to replace the lost affordable housing units that we now don't have available on the month-to-month basis due to the short-term rental market. I think it's a reality here in Portland. I know the City Council is divided on this, but our approach has been, if the sharing economy is a permanent part of our future, then we should at least level the playing field and make sure that the revenue is paid and collected as if they were hotel rooms. The Joint Office of Homeless Services is the chief recipient of about $27 million of money that comes through my budget. And the mayor is holding the joint office, the city and the county staff accountable for those outcomes. And as you can see, that's real money that's having an impact. I think if you look at our single point in time, homelessness went up 10% in Portland year over year. It went up over 30% in Seattle, and more than that in Oakland. So while it's unacceptably high, and I think the mayor would amplify that, the concerted effort of getting people off the street and out of harm's way has had a mitigating effect on our homeless problem. We're partway there, but we're not all the way done. So the meta budget for the Housing Bureau has gone up about 300% in the last 2 years. When I started, it was $70 million. It's about $215 million this year. So I wanted to give you just a couple of more slides on the Broadway corridor, because you'll read a lot about this in the context of Greater Portland Inc.'s proffer to HQ2, the Amazon RFP. We were planning on about 4 million square feet, 2 million of office, 2 million of housing. In this instance, more will give way to office if need be. The Housing Bureau's stake remains a fixed amount, but how much of that is offset by ambient affordable housing versus deeply subsidized affordable housing will be determined at a later date. That's why we care, because we have some real money in the deal. So the average FAR is about 7 FAR over the entire site. But there's a lot of infrastructure to be installed. In other words, there aren't streets through most of this site. So we're going to give up a couple of half blocks to the extension of the North Park blocks through the property to Johnson. And of course, Peabody needs more circulation. Johnson will become a major couplet connecting the Pearl to Union Station. And as you can see, there's a general breakdown that the existing Postal Service building and parking deck will be used for an interim use. Housing will be built on the north lot, presumably next to the extended park. And then as office demand increases, the existing building will be torn down and replaced with a much larger set of buildings. This is a ZGF-inspired plan, just showing the massing under the current, recently approved heights, where you start to see the bridgehead becoming a focal point for about a 400-foot building. So we think that is a bright prospect for knitting together Old Town Chinatown and the Pearl. There's obviously about 140 cities in the hunt, and there might be 20 of them that are really competitive. I think Portland will be competitive. There's no doubt in my mind that we won't put on a really good effort in this regard. But as the mayor has said, we're not going to put a lot of money on the table. We have a plan. We have a plan without Amazon. We're going to go forward with it. If they want to be part of Portland, that's great. But as announced in the Seattle Times last week, Seattle put $8 billion on the line to get Boeing's Dreamliner, and they actually have lost employees. So the largest subsidy in the history of the state of Washington has had no net positive effect. And Oregon can't even play at that level with $8 billion. So I think that just underscores the fact that we're in a national market and that we have to do what's right for Oregon, not necessarily what's right for the private company. So that concludes my remarks. My cell phone and email are on your handouts on the table. If you have questions, feel free to email me. or call me, either way. And I'll be around for as much of Jerry's and our other colleagues' presentation as possible. Thanks so much.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.